2/3 of people are now mixed of business backgrounds, science backgrounds. We've had romance literature people come through the program. We've had lawyers come through the program, former professional athletes come through the program, and they all just have the same thing in common, and that's a love of data. And that's the beautiful part about data, is you don't have to have a math and stats background to love it.
Hey, Big Ideas Raleigh listeners. I'm Dan Bagley, your friendly neighborhood enthusiast and proud City of Raleigh employee. So I'm glad you're here because today we're exploring creative ideas from citizens and city employees that help shape our City of Oaks. Today, we're joined by 3 special guests who will help us explore the power of data to support services and help with decision-making in local government. Let's dive in. Our 3 special guests are Jim Alberque, GIS and Emerging Technology Manager at the City of Raleigh, Dr. Bonnie Brown, Chief Data Officer at Wake County, and Dr. Aric LaBarr, Associate Professor of Analytics at the Institute of Advanced Analytics at NC State University. But we'll dive into what all those titles means in just a minute. But first, I want to kick off our conversation with a game we like to play called 2 Facts and a False. I'll share 3 statements, 2 will be true, 1 will be false, and you have to guess which one the false is. Now, you'll be playing against each other. So are you guys okay with this?
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready.
All right.
Can't we work together and figure out, it's just math here at this point. Yeah.
You know what? I'll allow it. Okay, here we go. A, between the dawn of time and 2003, 5 exabytes of data have been created by Google. By 2021, it was being created every 40 minutes. B, there are approximately 4,000 bytes of data for every grain of sand on Earth. Or C, data science was identified as the skill with the largest skill gap according to a 2021 report by the World Economic Forum. All right.
Oh, we need to work together.
Yeah, this is definitely a work together situation.
I don't know my grains of sand in relation to data.
I know.
Those numbers were astronomical. I don't know how to even quantify those.
I need a computer right now.
Man.
A quantum computer?
Let's talk about the third one.
Sure. There's been a very popular study that's been done countless times about there being a giant gap in supply and demand of people. Whether it was the World Economic Forum, though, to decide that, that's the thing I hesitate on.
That's
I always
a good
think
point.
it goes back and forth between security and data science. It's always like neck and neck of who's got the biggest skill gap.
It's true.
But I don't know about that source either. Shoot.
That's where my vote. Just because I can't wrap my brain around those other numbers.
I need a chart right now.
Okay.
Yeah. I think I'm going 3 as well. Yeah.
Are you
supportive?
Sure
Sure.
you don't want to try to wrap your brain around some of those other numbers?
I don't know how many zeros is exabytes.
I tell you what, I'm going to let you know right now.
Okay.
The actual answer is B.
Oh, sorry.
Because
All
it's
those
not,
grains of sand.
I know,
They
it's
got
the
us.
sand. It's not actually 4,000 bytes of data for every grain of sand. It's 400,000 bytes for every grain of sand.
Man, I could believe it.
Think of all those credit charges that you're racking up.
Yeah.
All those data.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's a
Yeah.
lot.
The digital exhaust, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Digital
not wrong.
exhaust.
Well, this is what we're going to jump into now, a little bit about those titles. And I want to learn more about what you do. So let's have a little fun and jump into that conversation. Jim, Bonnie, and Aric, we're thrilled to have you with us today and talk data. Beyond the maps, spreadsheets, beyond the number crunching, we hear you're all doing some pretty cool things with data. And we'd love the fans of the show to learn more about how data is fueling cool projects, especially if there are projects that are happening in the city. But before we jump in, why don't you tell us what it is you do? And we'll start with you, Bonnie.
Sure. So I'm the Chief Data Officer for Wake County, and I've been there for 5 years almost next month. And what we really do is try to empower people to use data. So while we have technical responsibilities around data pipelines and analytics and data science, really what we're trying to do is to get people to use data more effectively, whether it's where they get it from, how they use it, and how they visually represent it.
Fantastic. Aric.
Sure. So I'm an associate professor at NC State. And what we do at NC State, we're actually, fun fact, the very first Master of Science and Analytics program in the country. Been around for 17 years
Wow,
now.
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's really fun. It was something a long time ago. We've been doing this for a long time, unfortunately. But with that, so it's my job to be able to teach students how to be able to use data, much like what Bonnie described, to be able to make better decisions.
It's something I need to work on every day. No, thank you for that. Sure. And Jim.
Yeah, so very similar to Bonnie, right? So where the City of Raleigh is trying to become a more data-driven organization, and then my job is to try and to support that mission. And so turning zeros and ones into information that people can either make decisions, provide new services, enhance the services that exist.
That's great. So I'm hearing basically we need to be able to use data more effectively and how it helps and supports the people of the city and or teaching students how to become users of that said data. That's great. Now that we've heard a bit about your work, can you share what your big idea for your department or organization is right now that you're working on? And why don't we start with you, Jim?
So I take a lot of inspiration from what Bonnie just said, right? So there is this idea of this transition that's happening in the world and is happening in our organization, which is these employees within the city now need to use data in new ways. And it is a transition that's happening very, very quickly. And so the idea that people can discover and use data it doesn't sound like a revolutionary idea, but it's a pretty big idea in how do people find data and then how do they leverage it to make decisions, improve services, et cetera.
Well, that's interesting. How do you discover data?
Yeah, so the answer is in a whole bunch of different ways, right? And so depending, we have a very diverse organization, 4,000 employees. And so I think our job as practitioners is to provide discoverability in a number of different ways and making the friction or barriers between you and data, we need to lessen that. And so practically, what does that actually mean? And so we have field employees. And so how do we embed data into what people are doing in the field? How are they making decisions on where to cut pavement, those sorts of things? At an executive level, it's a little bit more of dashboards and spoon-feeding data to executives as they're making kind of tactical or strategic decisions. And then third, for that kind of group in the middle, it is what are some interfaces that you can use to use common language to find things, find data.
Yeah, common language. That's got to be difficult in this field to find a common language that, spans everybody.
It's getting easier every day. I mean, there's newer and newer technology to allow you to do that, but not to get into the kind of the back office of data, but metadata, documenting data. That's all the kind of the foundational stuff that we need to do to make it more discoverable, accessible, so that when people use it, they know what they're using, how to use it, what the data actually means, how it was derived, all of those sorts of things.
Before I jump to you, Aric, can you explain for our listeners what is metadata?
Just data about data. Yeah, so
multi-level.
Yeah. So it's just it is some definitions around what this data is, and so it's some narratives. There's some traditional ways to describe what this data set represents, how it was collected, what the fields mean, what are some values that you can expect, what do those values represent.
Yeah.
So that, all of us have had an experience where we've opened a spreadsheet or looked at data and been like, oh, 37. 37 what? What is that? Where was that? Where did that come? So just this data so that you can describe, defend a lot about the data.
Okay. All right. Bonnie, is he telling me the truth?
He is.
Okay.
Yes.
Just want to make sure.
Context. It's about context.
Okay. Great. Well, Aric, yourself, you're at the Institute. What are some of the big ideas that you guys are working on there?
Sure. So I think for us, it's always trying to make sure we're at the forefront of data. Much like what Jim was describing, this is an ever-changing field. Something that, you can just pull up the internet and something new will be out there about it. And so it's our job to be able to make sure we can prepare students to be users of these techniques in a modern sense, right? Statistics has been around for a long time.
Sure.
But how people use statistics, how people use the mathematics and the computer science to be able to answer these questions, that's changing every single day. And so we're trying to always be at the forefront of that. In fact, we're even hosting an AI summit coming up here in the next couple of months to try and, again, bring people in to talk about these concepts so that people can find out more about different things around AI, around data science, around analytics, around machine learning. Insert buzzword here, right? But that's the thing. This buzzword's always changing. So we have to understand what those are to make sure our students understand what they are so they can be prepared.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And same question to you, Bonnie. What kind of big ideas do you have going on with the county?
Yeah, so before I answer that, I will say that his program works because we just hired someone from that program.
That's perfect. I'll take it.
Yeah, so that's excellent. We are really focused on, I would say, literacy and enablement. So one of the things that's foundational for everyone to understand, we talked about speaking the same language. Data is really becoming everyone's responsibility. So it doesn't matter what your job is in the county. It's some aspect of data is being included there, but we don't always talk about it the same way. We're not always following security the same way. We need to make sure that we're all following that. So we instituted a data literacy program this year called Data as a Second Language, and that's been really a game changer for us in getting that language spread across the organization and not just among the people who are part of our user group, which is called AWAKE, Analytics at Wake. And we have over
really cool.
400 staff across the 5,000 employees at the county that are involved with us in some way. And we do office hours and mentoring. And really, it's about getting them to be able to do the data work themselves. And so they're looking to us for best practices and guidelines and providing some curated data, which means that it's gone through a data quality process, it's coming from the right source, and then allowing them to use the tools that we have to create whatever report dashboard they need for operations or maybe reporting back to the state or whatever they have going on.
So you just mentioned some of those tools. What would be the tools that you would have, at hand to be able to use?
So the number one tool that they probably use is Excel to do a lot of it. But we try to be tool agnostic when we talk about
Tool agnostic.
Yeah,
That's a great term.
When we talk about our data literacy program and when we do training on intro statistics and things like that, we try not to focus on a tool because we like them to be able to use the tool that they're comfortable with. And we're more focused on the concepts that they're working with. But we do have an enterprise solution for a data visualization tool that we use. And so we also do classes on that specifically, but we try to keep that away from the foundational classes. So it doesn't matter what tool, it's just about the concept.
That's great. And fascinating. And I love the idea of data as a second language.
Yeah.
That's a really cool term. What was the epiphany or the aha moment, like, we need to do this?
I think when you start to ask people to do things they've never done before, it's really unfair to ask them to do that without foundational knowledge. And so that's kind of where it started from, is that we can't expect people to all of a sudden be data-driven because there's a board goal that says the organization will be data-driven, right? So how do we enable them to do that? And sometimes we think in technology tools first, and that's really not the beginning. It's about understanding ethics of data. It's about understanding what's the right place to get your data from. Like Wikipedia is not the place to be getting your data from. We talk about that. And we do it in a fun way. So we do it through scenarios. We do it through group projects during the class. It's a 4-part series right now. And then we're offering some little series on top of that. So we have intro to statistics that we're working on right now, data quality, and then we're working on a survey one because that is another kind of big use of data and also a big misuse of data. Knowing how to properly write a question without bias, and then knowing how to deal with the responses that you get back, especially with open-ended questions. So we do a lot with sentiment analysis. So is it a positive comment or a negative comment? We look at the emotion of the comment. So they're using angry words, hopefully not, but happy words. And then we do a thematic analysis as well. So can we say, like, all of these things relate to this one topic?
That's great information. And what I got out of that was, don't use Wikipedia.
Yes, do not use Wikipedia. Okay. So I'll give you a little preview. We do an example where I ask them, what's the population of Wake County? And so I give them 5 different choices, and then I tell them where those choices came from. And we talk about why this is the appropriate source to get that information from, like the Census Bureau. And this is the inappropriate source to get that information from, Wikipedia, where I can go in and change it to whatever I want. And so it seems like a very simple lesson, but it's something that they can think about and also think about in their personal lives too as they're using data. And all of this, of course, with the AI tie, is that if we don't have these foundations in place for data literacy, for data governance and data quality, then AI is going to be useless. You're not going to get the outcomes that you want because you have to have these foundational things in place.
Makes perfect sense to me, actually. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Aric, can you share any examples of how data analysis has directly influenced a recent decision, at the Institute or with the students?
Oh, definitely. So outside of the students actually working on data, not surprisingly, we collect a lot of data on them. And so with that being the case, they go through peer evaluations and feedback literally every 5 weeks. And we collect tons of data on all the metrics that they're evaluating each other on. And then we use those metrics to then help coach them through how to be able to improve as a teammate. And so it could be something where, you do really well on a few different attributes, but there's some things you need to work on a little bit.
Sure.
You wouldn't necessarily know that because maybe late to you going to a meeting might be, I show up, on time, and, on time has a 5-minute window.
Right.
Where some other people, late to them is you weren't in your seats 5 minutes before the meeting even began. And so trying to be able to work through all of that and then talking with students and looking at the data for them specifically, so we could then coach them through the idea of how to be able to be a quote unquote better teammate in their future endeavors.
Oh, that's pretty great. So do they take this peer metric information to heart, or is it kind of tough for some?
The hope.
Yeah.
How many times have you gotten feedback and you took every piece of it to heart?
Exactly.
So that's something where, again, we have professional coaches on staff to be able to help them through that so that they can help try and digest that and figure out strategies to be able to improve on that.
Oh, that's great.
And just like with most things, data is biased a lot of times when we see things, especially when they're opinion-based, much like you said with surveys, right? Mm-hmm. Imagine, surveys where people have free response to tell you how you're doing. Depending on if that person had a good or a bad day, that might impact things.
You're right.
So that's why we have all these different data points that are collected from all of your teammates. One person saying something maybe, you need improving on, but everyone else says you do something really well in that. Maybe this is just a wrong data point. But if you have a lot of data points pointing towards the same thing, now again, they're data students. So they're like, okay, the preponderance of evidence is starting to come that maybe I should show up to meetings on time. So it's those kinds of aspects that we try and help people through.
Yeah, that's pretty great. I never really thought about that. And it would be interesting to see if you could use that data, not only take it from, these are college level courses.
Yeah.
Could you do that in high school? Could you do that in middle school or junior? What do they call middle school and what's under middle
Elementary?
School? Elementary, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting idea. To show what they're doing in numbers, in data, to help them get better. And I suppose you kind of do with a report card.
To some extent.
But this is interesting. So
definitely no free response for the middle schoolers, though. As my wife used to work in middle school teaching. Let's not let them just put whatever they like in there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Wikipedia.
Exactly.
So Dan, I wanted to kind of pick up on that. So I think that, we had talked about this revolution that's happening. Mm-hmm. It's happening everywhere.
Yeah.
And this experience that I have with my kids.
Yeah.
So in Wake County, we use Power School.
Right.
And thank God Power School didn't exist when I was in high school. So I am able to, on a minute-by-minute basis, check the progress and Canvas, et cetera. And so it has just changed the world that my kids live in. There is way more accountability. Right. Again, there's positive and negative, sides to that. But it's just this interesting thing that's happening around the world. And I think the way it affects us, and just to pick up on what Bonnie was talking about earlier, is in our organizations, people are going to use these tools. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're going to use these tools whether or not we're there or not. And if we can provide guidance, we'll end up in a much better place. If we don't, we'll end up with these derivative kind of products and services that don't align, and there's no strategic kind of plan around them. And so I just think it's this really exciting time, but also a little frightening and kind of scary.
Crazy.
From a teacher perspective, so I teach at university as well, and it's definitely changed the way you teach, like with all the AI tools that are available now and the way students react, especially with an online school. It's very much different than, when we went to school. It's a very different situation. So it's not just a difference for the students and the parents, but it's also a different experience for the educators as well. Mm-hmm.
So you made me think of something new. What do you say to the people that are like, it's just data. Data can't capture a smile, or data can't capture how somebody feels. Although I think, Bonnie, you were alluding to some of that earlier. What do you say to someone like that?
I think there's a reason you captured that data. There's a reason you asked the question, and if you don't do anything with it, then why did you ask the question to begin with? And we talk about that a lot with surveys. It's like, well, you asked this question. If you're not going to do anything with the response, why are you bothering people and asking them with this? Because there's definitely survey fatigue happening as well, right? Because everybody resorts to that. So I really think the feedback loop on surveys is really important, and asking those questions are important. But there's still a human element to all of this, right? You can't ignore that. Someone still has to interpret. Yes, AI might help you do it faster, but you still have to have that eye of judgment on it because it can learn from wrong data. It can fabricate information that it learned incorrectly from data. So you still have to have that educated human eye on that to help make sure that what you're getting from those tools is relevant.
Thank you for that answer.
And to kind of piggyback on that, in government specifically, we can't do things the same way we've done them because that's the way we've always done them. Yeah. We can't do that. We have to, people are now questioning, why are you making this decision? What is the data that supports it? And so that's why data is so important.
Yeah.
It is now, again, that revolution or that cultural change that's happening in the world, where the world is now operating on data. It is the new oil of
You're right.
kind of this century. So.
It's a transparency factor for us too. Like we have public records and our decisions are public and how we made those decisions are public as well. And also I think there's a consumerism drivenness to government now. So what people are experiencing in their personal lives, they expect that same quality of technology and speed from government agencies. So we have no choice but to adapt.
And I think it also piggybacks on that idea that this is a data-driven decision. It's not just a decision by a person. It's not a data decision. It's a data-driven decision, right? We're trying to empower people with this. And so like you guys said, this is where that human element comes into play. You need that data, but you need that person to interpret it, to be able to use it because they have the context of the problem. The data just has the context of whatever it is trying to summarize.
Right.
But with you having the context of the problem, using that data to be able to try and reach people who may not have been able to be reached before, that's something that's new.
It's a with instead of instead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, with that, we need to take
transition.
a quick break, and we'll be right back with Big Ideas Raleigh. Welcome back to Big Ideas Raleigh. I'm with Bonnie Brown, Chief Data Officer at Wake County, Jim Alberque, GIS and Emerging Technology Manager at the City of Raleigh, and Aric LaBarr, Associate Professor of Analytics at NC State University. When we just left off, a really good point was brought up about survey fatigue, and it's a real thing. Jim, can you tell me a little bit what the City of Raleigh is doing to try to, help maybe negate that, or what do we do to make sure we're not bugging the people all the time?
Yeah, good question. So just in general, on the communication side, we're trying to manage communication strategically, whether it be surveys, content, push notifications, whatever those things are. So balance is a really important thing here. We do have a responsibility to inform our citizens of what's happening in the city, engage with them around making decisions and getting their input, but obviously, we want to be respectful for their time, as well as we also don't want to turn them off, provide too much noise where we kind of turn them off to engaging with the city. So we try and manage it at a campaign level, which is kind of a fancy way to say we take our communications department and our IT department, and we try and collaborate around, to Bonnie's point earlier, what are we trying to do? What is the goal of this? Let's kind of outline kind of real key outcomes of what we're trying to do around this campaign. Are we trying to get some input, data? Are we trying to share information? Are we trying to sell an idea? What are those sort of things that we're trying to do? And we're trying to consolidate that and have that kind of plan in place around a multi-stage kind of plan. Hey, we're going to let them know what this is. We're going to direct them back to our website. We're going to then provide the survey. We're going to then feed back this information to show how we're collecting this data and what we're doing with this data. And then finally, what is the kind of grand outcome of the campaign?
Okay, well, that makes perfect sense to me. Does it work?
We're constantly evolving this, right? So I think we're making progress. And so by works means are we moving the needle? I think we are.
That's great.
But we're trying to constantly revisit that kind of concept.
Make it better.
And again, there's a lot of stakeholders here. There is the departments that have a very critical mission. There's political bodies that have critical missions. There are stakeholders, right? I'm representing the data side of it to say, hey, are we collecting this in a thoughtful way where at the end of the day, my team or we can empower you to deliver on the outcomes that you're hoping to deliver on.
Then I have to ask you this real quickly, and that's what are some ways that the organization is ensuring that the data that you are collecting and analyzing is inclusive and representative of all the members of the Raleigh community?
Yeah, that's a big challenge, right? So that is a huge challenge. So there's a couple of different ways that we're doing this. So I'm going to nerd out kind of a little bit. So one of the initiatives that we have that I'd like to talk about later is we're trying to create what's called an equity index.
Okay.
And this is this lens, and I'm a map guy, so I'm trying to look at this through a geographic lens and trying to basically create some sort of a quantifiable metric around the city around, hey, where are some opportunities to make sure that we're being equitable in a whole bunch of different ways, whether it be investments, engagement, outcomes, communications. And so when we engage with the community, we're trying to apply that to say, hey, is this representative of the city from an equity perspective? And so that's very complex. There's a lot of ways to think about equity, and right now we're thinking about it in a few different ways. The city is quickly gentrifying. There's a lot of activity. So we're thinking about it from a housing perspective.
Okay.
Secondly, we're thinking about it from an environmental justice perspective. Thirdly, we're thinking about it from a digital equity. I mean, COVID really brought to light connectivity, access, and affordability of broadband. And then fourth is transportation. With the city growing so quickly, access to transportation is becoming very vital to all of our communities. So that's just a way that we're trying to better understand how we're equitably engaging with the community. Is the data that we have representative, et cetera?
Cool. And it sounds like this is also one of those journeys, not a destination. It's always evolving. It's great. Bonnie, we were just talking a little bit about consumerism and how that's tied to data. Can you give us a little example of that?
Sure. I think it affects the way that or the expectations for data in two different ways. One is the amount of data that you get. So looking at, in my real life, if I buy stuff on Amazon, I can find out when it shipped, where it is. It's 10 stops from my house. You get all of that information. And so as a consumer of, government services, I expect a little bit of that, where if I put in a request, I can see where it is and where it's at and who's worked on it and all of that information. And I think the other expectation is not just the data you're being provided, but how is it being provided? So everybody's used to a mobile experience. Everybody's used to things looking like an app. And so we use that for our, end user design experiments as we're working on things, is to make things kind of fit into what that consumer expects. So that when we're doing reports on our public website, when we're doing things internally, because, our employees are also consumers too, making sure that things look and feel in a way that they're used to using them.
Sure.
And then hopefully they'll be able to use it more effectively.
So do you feel that most things you're designing now are made for the mobile device?
We try to make it mobile ready, yes, because we have so many field employees, right? So we need to make sure that just when we talk about equity, we want to make sure there's equitability between our employees as well.
What do we do for, the Wake County and the city citizens that are a little bit older? Mm-hmm. They might not have an understanding of how to use that cell phone. They use it to make that call, but they might not know how to use it to jump online or get data.
So we try to make things responsive. So whether it's on a mobile device or it's on a laptop or it's on any kind of screen, it can change its design to fit with the screen that it's working with. And then we also try to think of, in our UX, think about ADA, think about colorblindness, think about having terms listed, so we really put some tools around the context.
Yeah, you really have to think everything through when you're putting these out there. That's very cool. Aric, I'd like to ask you a question about context and how you take context and you turn that into data and how you let that data drive a decision.
Sure. So I think, and Jim and I were actually talking about this before we got onto the podcast, about the idea of working with clients to understand what the problem really is. Because a lot of times people will propose a problem to you, but that may not actually be the problem that they have. And so a lot of times it's going back and forth with clients, back and forth with organizations, back and forth with people to make sure that we get what things they're really trying to answer. And that's where data really comes in handy. Because like we were talking about earlier, sometimes you can show someone something and they actually don't like it at all.
Right.
And that's just as informative, actually, as them loving it, because it's an answer. I'd much rather you have strong feelings about what I'm showing you as compared to no feelings about what I'm showing you.
Okay.
And so it's something where we're trying to be able to teach people how to be able to actually solve a problem, and that provides you the context you need to really look at data better, right? I can give my students a data set and say, here's a bunch of variables, we'll call them X1, X2, X3. Here's a target that you're trying to predict, it's called Y, go. And they'll do a wonderful job being able to understand that X2 is the best variable possible. And that is zero value to anybody else outside of them. And when you're trying to be able to work with people and help them see the value they get from data, that's where the story comes in, right? And so this variable is helpful, and this is why we think it's helpful. And this is how it can actually help you. And that's where the context is really important.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. That helped me understand it a lot better.
Sure.
Can I provide an example
please.
of this? So, so I had talked about this equity index that we're working on. So early work, a few years ago, we were building an early version called the Prosperity Index.
Okay.
And we were working with the economic development team, and we basically identified these key variables. There were about 7 of them that included the obvious ones: income, percent of population homeowners, percent of income spent on housing. There were like 5 or 6 of them, and we put them into a pot, and we kind of mixed it up and created a data set and presented it to this group for ground truthing.
Okay.
And a whole bunch of people said, that's not reflective of the community. That's not right. We did something wrong. And so oftentimes what we're asked to do is model the real world with data.
Okay.
The real world's really complex and complicated.
Yeah, you're right.
And so we are trying to create proxies for that. And so this context is really, when it comes to transportation is a great example. We're constantly trying to model transportation with data. And what you do is you put a bunch of data in and it doesn't come out right. You talk to transportation practitioners and they're like, no, that is not, the story down there is that people are waiting for the bus for an hour. That's our problem. Blah, blah. So context, you need that context of people who are, who have that kind of real world complexity that they can kind of bring to the conversation.
Well, I love this idea of ground truthing, as you put it. And how do you convince those that that's not right when you have the data sets that say this is correct, this is what we're seeing? Well, what do you say to them?
We're both right. We can both be right.
Right. Okay, that's fascinating.
That means that we have inappropriately modeled the data, right? In most cases, not in all cases, but it makes us go back to the drawing board to say, hey, this is the data. Again, that metadata is really important. This is the data that we're using. This is how it was collected. This is what it represents. This world that you're describing is different than that. What's the gap there? What's the delta? Let's see if we need to augment this data with other data. So that we can both be right in that situation.
That's a great point. I think that's the fact that there might not be a wrong. It's just you're both right. And
I think it's about the partnership, though. I think that's the most important part of this is that the technologists can't do it on their own. The business partners can't do it on their own. It's the combination that really makes it work. And then without their real world, ideas and things that they're experiencing, my science doesn't matter. And then my science on its own is just, irrelevant. So I think it's the combination of that really makes things work. And most of what we do is honestly change management and relationship building. And that's how we're able to show them how we could do things with data. And even whether it's right or wrong, could be a filter, that caused that problem. Right. We just building those relationships and really listening to them about what they're experiencing and then showing them the data that backs up what we're seeing, that we can get to those resolutions where we're able to say, okay, we're somewhere in the middle, or if you change this one variable or this one filter, that it makes more sense. Because sometimes they don't want to hear what we have to say from a data perspective because it doesn't fit their story. And honestly, people can make data say anything they want with the right chart. So it's really important to have that documentation about where the data came from, what was its journey on its way to this visualization that you're showing. So what was done to it, what was filtered, how were things calculated or changed to back up that picture. So we always talk about it from a data, a narrative, and a visualization perspective. And you have to have all 3 components in order to have a successful outcome.
I remember a great example of something very similar to that, where we look at this data set when the students first come in, and it's a relationship between the amount of education spending per state based on SAT scores. And it has a negative relationship. And you'd be like, this doesn't make any sense at all. The more we spend, the worse SAT scores get on a statewide level. And from a just data context, it's well, I guess that's what the data says, so this is what we're going to do.
Right.
But looking at it from another context, SAT scores are not used in every single state. There's a wide variety of states in the middle of this country that use ACT as the primary way of doing things. And so for those students who take SATs in those states, It's because they're trying to go out of state. They're trying to go to a different school, potentially a better school.
That makes
and so now when you take into account overall scores, now it's, actually it makes complete sense. The more spending that we give to education, the better people do in overall score, not just SAT score. And so, but again, this goes back to that diversity and that inclusion and equity. Someone who only uses SAT scores was the person who came up with that first analysis. Right. They'd never heard of an ACT really. Right. It never really crossed their mind. They didn't even know they were being biased, and yet they were.
Yeah.
And so that's where trying to bring in different people, getting different perspectives, that's where the value really comes in, much like what Bonnie was describing. We have to have those people there to check us sometimes to make sure we're not seeing something wrong because we have our own inherent biases we don't even know about.
And for the record, I now know why I did poorly on the SAT because we spent too much.
Exactly.
But in all honesty, I took the ACT. I'm from Nebraska, Midwest. So you're right. We did not study as hard for the SAT because that wasn't something that was as important.
Exactly.
It was the ACT. Great point. Thank you. So Aric, this next one's for you. Could you share any partnerships or collaborations the Institute has formed with other organizations or agencies to leverage data for community benefit?
How much time do you have? So a few big ones I think that come to mind would be, first is Raleigh Water. We've actually worked with Raleigh Water to be able to analyze some of their data, look at their sewage data specifically. I can't tell you everything. It's all under non-disclosure agreement.
Okay.
But looking at different outliers and when things will occur, basically, where do we need to start worrying about where there may be a water issue? Under what part of the city would this water issue happen more likely so that they can better address those things ahead of time? Another one that we've done, this is a little bit more on a statewide level as compared to a local level, is we've worked with North Carolina's Office of State Budget and Management. And what we've done there is for every single county, we've forecasted out where deficits might occur so that the state can come in and work with those counties before these deficits occur to try and help them.
Oh, very cool. And these are the students doing this?
These are the students doing this. So we have a capstone-like project. We call it a practicum project for our students, where we put a group of 5 students working with an organization, a company, to be able to solve their problem completely for free. The goal is just to be able to provide them a really good educational experience and to provide companies with a different view of their data that maybe 5 students who've never seen their data before may be able to provide for them.
That's fascinating. I asked the same question of you, Jim or Bonnie. Any partnerships or collaborations that your departments have formed with other organizations or agencies that have a community benefit?
With each other.
Yeah. Why don't you go first?
No, go ahead. Yes.
So So in city government or county government, we are departmentally focused. So first and foremost, collaborations with other departments, housing and neighborhood, Raleigh Water, parks, et cetera, trying to basically read the newspaper, watch the council meeting. What are the kind of hot button items? Right. How can we potentially help you, right? But outside of that, some things that we're super excited about. One particularly that I'm really excited about is there's an organization called MITRE, which is a large research firm, does a lot of federal government work. We recently did a project with them around microclimate modeling.
Really?
Yeah. So I'm going to try not to get too PhD because I don't completely understand it. But so they have kind of high resolution weather data and have created predictive models of what future weather conditions will look like at a micro scale level.
Interesting.
Then we have the city provided a digital twin. So that's a digital representation of the physical city. So this is, imagine a 3D digital model of the city. And we took those two together and created a simulation model that created these really interesting microclimate wind patterns. And MITRE was using it for to do drone, to determine what drone paths would look like in 2030. And the reason they picked 2 cities. They picked New York City and Raleigh because we're very similar. We're the same baseline. It was because
I see the Raleigh skyline. I think New York City every single time.
People get us confused all the time. But I don't know if you knew this, but Wake Med had a program where they were doing blood drops over New Bern Ave using drones.
I did not know that.
Really fascinating work. So anyway, we engaged with them over doing this kind of drone modeling. And so they did the modeling, brought it back to the city. And so our sustainability team was like, not only are you showing these really interesting wind shears in microclimate, but you also are showing these that are related to temperature. Can we do this from a heat island perspective and start to determine what heat islands are going to look like with potential future development patterns? So you think of major initiatives in the city that will reshape how we do development, that might increase intensity of development. What are some potential future conditions related to
that's really cool.
Heat islands? And we're talking about sub-meter resolution modeling. So that's really super, super interesting.
Yeah, that is cool. And I think I've actually seen some of your modeling when you've presented it, and it is fascinating when you see, the maps of the city and how you can manipulate that data too. It's really cool. So that's great work. Thanks for sharing that with us. Bonnie.
Sure. So one of the projects that we're working on right now is a huge community project called Familiar Faces. And it involves finding vulnerable populations that use maybe EMS, hospitals, sheriff's department, and some other factors that lead to them to be, frequently seen by community. And what we're trying to do is get better 360 care coordination for them. So looking at the whole person. And so we're trying to combine some data sets that have never been combined before and to get a whole view of someone from data and then see if we could do maybe referrals or better care coordination around that person. So it's in RFP right now, so I can't talk about too much about it. But we are working on getting those agreements in place to be able to combine that data, how to identify a person against data sets that do not have a common denominator to make sure we're talking about the same person across all 3 data sets. And then working with community partners in behavioral health for the county, and then all of these major hospitals and providers of services to coordinate together on this project. So it is huge.
Yeah, it is.
And it has a big community impact. So we're really excited about that. It is going to be a challenging project, I'm not going to lie. But we're still very excited about it because of the impact to the community. And to me, it's that one of the reasons I work in government is that I can still be a technologist and see my impact. Right. And so that's not something that everybody gets working in the public sector. You do get that advantage. So it's really cool.
Well, and frankly, I mean, each one of you just gave me 3 completely different ways you guys are using, data analytics, GIS. And it's fascinating to me because you said it at the beginning. There's so much you can do with it. And that's pretty crazy. And I guess until you really stop and think about it, you don't know how much we do depend on all this information and how, Jim, you said earlier on, it's just exploding. There's just so much everywhere all at once now.
So to piggyback on that, Aric and I were talking before the podcast about, in the city and the county, we need to start to leverage the opportunity that Aric just talked about, right? These students, we have this vast array of higher education organizations around the city that are doing amazing things. Yeah. And the projects that they should be spinning out should be Raleigh-Wake County, right? In my opinion. And so
benefit us, please.
And so the challenge that we have in local government, we run so lean.
Yeah.
We are so lean that we just don't have even capacity to ask for help sometimes. So, which I think I'm going to make a conscious effort to just say, hey, listen, we're gonna collaborate as a result of this podcast, because again, we are data rich, challenge rich, insight poor, right? So it is a perfect proving ground for these types of kind of collaborations.
So what you're saying is this podcast has just solved some of the city's problems.
Yes.
Don't forget your county friends, please.
Yes.
We want to play too. We want to play too.
Yes, you're in.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, we need to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be playing another game called The Sound Around. Hey, everybody, welcome back. It's now time for that wonderful game, The Sound Around, where I'm going to play a sound, and you have to guess what that sound is. Aric, are we playing as a team, or are we going against each other?
I think we just established that we're a group coordinated and working together.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you,
Bonnie.
We will work together on this. So I will play the sound. I will stop the sound, and then I'll give you a minute to figure out what you think it is. I have faith that you will know this one. Here we go. Okay.
Sounds like my son has gotten into the garage again, and I don't appreciate it.
It sounds like a table saw.
Yeah.
I was going to go with a dot matrix printer.
Oh, yeah. That's probably better fitted than
That's
tools.
where I was going to go. I feel like this is Family Feud. We should kind of...
It's a good
We're
point.
like aging ourselves by knowing what that is, I think, a little
They
bit.
have new
but-
episodes, right? Still, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm hoping.
So, do we have a final answer?
Yeah, we'll
going
go
with
with
Jim.
that. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Jim, you nailed it.
Yay.
It is a
Awesome.
dot
Done.
matrix printer. I figured, we're doing data. You have to print something off at some point.
Yep.
And back of the day, that's right. You don't want printing
you
off
don't print
anymore.
anything.
Exactly.
You're right. Kids back home don't print anymore. Well, thank you guys. Before we end the podcast, we want to give you guys the opportunity to talk about something that we haven't given you the opportunity to say. So what's something we haven't asked that you'd love the people of Raleigh and the Raleigh fans to know about? And we'll start with you, Jim.
Let's so much to talk about. So one, how grateful I am to work for the City of Raleigh. So one of the things that I didn't talk about is the team behind me, right? So there are 8 talented folks who have kind of 3 things. They're curious. They have an aptitude to learn because this space is changing, and they really are interested in making an impact. And so, every day I come into work, I park about a quarter mile away where I walk in, and during that walk, I look at the city and think about how grateful I am to work here, because it's a great city in and of itself, but the people I get to work with are just amazing, and we're doing amazing things.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. And I, too, love working for the city. It's great people all around. And I've worked with you, Jim, for many years, and it's been a pleasure every time. Bonnie.
So same, because we both have what I would call the small but mighty teams, right? We have a lot of responsibility and a lot of tasks and a lot of demand, and my team is just amazing. We have people on the team who have worked at the county for 20 years. And so they have this institutional knowledge to go along with their technical skills. And then the rest of my team is less than 5 years, or some of them less than 3 months. So we have a lot of diversity on the team, and just really working together, I think, is what makes a difference. And one of the things about working in government is having that impact to the community. And so they could do what they're doing anywhere, and they choose to do it with us. And we're just really grateful for that. And we look for that when we're hiring. We're always looking for people who are thinking about the community side of it, and not just about the cool technology or the fun chart we get to build. So it's really about what's the impact that we're having, which is rare in IT, that we get to visually see in our community the things that we're impacting.
Yeah, that's great.
But I do love the fun charts.
As long as they're not pie charts, we're fine.
And as long as they're colorblind safe. I appreciate you mentioning that earlier as a colorblind person.
Oh,
Yeah.
excellent.
Wait. What? We can't have pie charts anymore?
No, okay. I wrote a blog about it. You can read about it later.
Okay.
It's a whole separate podcast.
It is a misused chart format, and everybody knows that it's a trigger for me. So if there is a pie chart in a presentation, everybody turns around and looks at me or sends me a message. It's really sad, but true. Yeah.
This is great to know. Thank you, Bonnie.
You're welcome.
Eric, please.
Sure.
Take us home, Eric.
So Jim gave me the perfect plug earlier around the idea of working with different organizations, and it's something that we do at North Carolina State, especially. Whereas a land grant institution, it is our goal to be able to help North Carolina, and specifically here in Wake County and the City of Raleigh, to be able to help out with anything that we can do. So any organization that's out there that has data that needs help, we're here to be able to provide that help for you guys. It's a wonderful experience for the students because they get a realistic view of what something will look like in their jobs as compared to a textbook example that they've probably seen 100 times. And they get to work with real people with real problems. And it's a great experience for the companies as well, because they finally get the chance to sort of, like you mentioned earlier, Jim, peek in and sort of say, hey, do these students look like someone I'd want to hire? But also it's something where you get a completely different perspective on things. The lovely part about our program is only about a third of people come from a math and stats background. So 2/3 of people are now mixed of business backgrounds, science backgrounds. We've had romance literature people come through the program. We've had lawyers come through the program, former professional athletes come through the program. and they all just have the same thing in common, and that's a love of data. And that's the beautiful part about data, is you don't have to have a math and stats background to love it. And so that's where I think this can sort of all come together really nicely and work with organizations that, again, have an opportunity to help people, right? As compared to just going and working at a bank or going and working at a massive insurance company, where they do good work. But this, like you said earlier, Bonnie, you can see the results of what you do.
Right. Well, I have to thank you all very much, Jim, Bonnie, Aric. Thanks so much for being with us today. And thank you for listening to or watching this podcast. Give us a follow. Find the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast on any podcast app or on YouTube. We've got more great episodes coming your way as we dive deep into the heartbeat of your Oak City. And hey, if you have any ideas for our podcast, let us know. Visit our podcast page to learn how you can share your ideas with us. We'd love to hear from you. And a special shout out to the production team behind the podcast, Earfluence, a Raleigh-based podcast production company. Learn more at earfluence.com. This podcast was brought to you by the City of Raleigh's Office of Strategy and Innovation, also known as the Office of Yes and the City of Raleigh Communication Department. I'm Dan Bagley, and we'll see you next time on the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast.